The chamber of judgment was vast enough to hold a dreadnought, and yet today it held something far smaller and infinitely more troublesome. We of the conquered High Court had convened for wars, for the sentencing of insurrectionist worlds, for the cleansing of genocidal sects. But never had we gathered for a species so young, so unrefined, so staggeringly arrogant as these humans. The charges were simple, the evidence irrefutable. Humanity had seeded warp harvest reactors, crude, rugged, and dangerously cheap, to frontier colonies not their own. With each reactor, the Concord's carefully regulated markets groaned. Whole sectors once dependent on licensed Concord energy now fed on human scrap tech. It was destabilization in its rawest form. I was present as Analyst Marshal Vorik, tasked with technical testimony. The chamber's light strips burned cold white across polished obsidian walls, throwing the accused into cruel relief. Their representatives, one in a simple dark uniform, the other in civilian drab, stood in the circle of witness, tiny figures surrounded by tiers of towering species. Humanity is less than 3 centuries into warp travel, Judge Matriarch Hesir intoned. Her voice rolled like stone across the gallery. And yet they presume to alter the balance of 10,000-year systems. For this crime, the Concord brings judgment. I spoke when prompted, my mandibles clicking against translator mesh. The warp harvest reactors are unsafe. They rely on primitive containment fields and fission kickstart sequences. Yet they are rugged enough to survive misuse, cheap enough to proliferate, and compact enough to be transported in freighters. Human recklessness multiplies instability 1,000-fold. This is not ignorance. It is aggression disguised as progress. The gallery rumbled with assent. From the core imperial legates to the scaled emissaries of the Threx Combine, consensus was clear. These bipeds had overstepped. Then the sentencing was declared. Annihilation, said Hesir flatly. By standard sanction, their fleets will be reduced, their colonies scoured, their cradles sterilized if resistance persists, unless, her eyes, six-lidded and black as oil, at the narrowed, unless the condemned invoke ordeal, ancient right, trial by combat. A ripple of derisive laughter surged through the tiers, a quaint relic, still codified in Concord law for amusement more than application. Species occasionally invoked it, but none had survived long enough to regret doing so. The human envoy stiffened. He was younger than most representatives we saw, his posture stiff with pride or ignorance. Then we invoke ordeal, he said, his voice amplified across the chamber. Mockery erupted. One of the Threx delegates hissed so loudly his frills snapped open. You court extinction! Your fleets number dozens where ours number thousands. Hesir leaned forward. So be it. The ordeal is granted. By your choice, you will face the fleets dispatched to execute judgment. Survive and you may claim exile. Fail and humanity ends. The humans did not flinch. That was their most infuriating trait. The refusal to bow even when hopelessness was self-evident. I was summoned later to provide fleet comparative analysis for the tribunal record. My report, etched into the crystalline archive, remains clear. The United Human Navy operates 6 active Aegis-class capital carriers. Dimensions: 440 meters in length, with hull composites derived from plasma shear panels and steel alloys. Propulsion: dual fusion torch drives, with estimated acceleration profiles barely half of Concord line cruisers. Armament: broadside plasma torches delivering 3.6 terajoules per discharge, effective only at close range. These are outdated designs, inefficient against Concord energy shielding. Human auxiliary craft include approximately 120 torch raiders, disposable frames outfitted with antimatter demolition charges, warp stabilized to penetrate slipstream junctions. While potentially damaging, their navigation systems are crude, lacking Concord-grade prediction matrices. These units are likely to inflict more casualties upon themselves than enemy assets. By all metrics, the human fleet is underpowered, underprotected, and strategically unsound. In standard simulations, 6 Aegis carriers cannot withstand a single Concord Judgment-class system cracker. Therefore, their ordeal is predetermined, failure. It was then that I first observed him. The one they called Captain Darren Holt. He had once worn our insignia. During the probationary years of humanity's membership petition, Holt had served as an attaché to the Concord Navy, studying our deployments, observing our logistics. He had defected without ceremony when his world withdrew from negotiations, returning to Earth with a knowledge no primitive should possess. Now he stood at the edge of the tribunal circle, uniform plain, eyes steady. His voice carried in a measured cadence. You want us extinguished. You want us contained. That much is clear, but you misjudge us. Humanity does not fear exile. We do not fear condemnation. We choose our own sentence. Laughter rippled again from the tiers. The arrogance of this creature was astonishing. To speak as though his species had any agency left. And what sentence do you choose? Demanded Hesir, mocking. Holt's gaze did not waver. We choose ordeal, not as mockery, not as mercy. We choose it as weapon. Even the chamber hushed at that. Weapon? Ordeal had never been called that. It was ritual. Execution drawn out. Nothing more. I confess in that moment, though I knew the inferiority of their fleets, though I knew the statistical impossibility of survival, I felt a sliver of unease. Holt's voice was not bravado. It was calculation. The tribunal closed session with laughter still echoing. The writ of ordeal was sealed. Concord fleets mobilized. In the margins of my report, I added one final observation for record, a note that drew ridicule from my peers. These humans lack scale, they lack refinement, they lack history, but they do not lack will. If ordeal is a weapon, they may yet wield it in ways we have not foreseen. At the time, I thought it merely a professional caution. I did not yet understand that I had recorded the first crack in the Concord's certainty. The tribunal adjourned, but the work for us, the analysts, had just begun. If ordeal had been invoked, the Concord required comprehensive fleet assessments. Numbers had to be tallied, strengths cataloged, weaknesses exposed, so that the spectacle could be recorded for history. I delivered my report in segments, dry and methodical. United Human Navy, 6 Aegis-class carriers. Length, 440 meters. Hull, steel composite reinforced with plasma shear panels. Plating density, at maximum, 1 meter. Propulsion, twin fusion torch drives. Acceleration rate 2.7 G sustained, barely half of Concord frontline standards. Estimated operational lifespan of each carrier, 40 years. Current service, already past design expectancy. From the tiers, senior officers clicked mandibles and fluttered frills. Amusement. Primary armament, plasma torch broadsides. Output, 3.6 terajoules per discharge. Optimal range, under 20 kilometers. Effective range against Concord shielding, negligible. In short, a weapon designed for knife-range combat, which no sane fleet doctrine employs. Secondary armaments, point defense coil guns, kinetic in nature, insufficient against heavy Concord armor. I let the weight of that truth linger. Their fleet doctrine emphasizes proximity. That drew laughter. No galactic navy close to such distances anymore. Space was ruled by beams, by missiles, by relativistic projectiles. And yet these primitives had designed ships for slugging matches up close, as though naval combat were still an ocean duel on their homeworld. But I was not finished. Auxiliary complement, approximately 120 torch raiders, disposable hulls, each fitted with antimatter demolition charges between 10 and 15 megatons equivalent. Navigation systems crude, guidance algorithms outdated. They are warp stable, allowing them to transit slipstream junctions, but steering tolerances are poor. Simulation predicts high rate of friendly loss during deployment. The judgment chamber hummed with contempt. Self-destructive, illogical, wasteful, one of the Threx envoys hissed. And finally, conquered comparison. A single judgment-class system cracker, 9 kilometers length. Plating, triple density, neutron carbide. Armament, planetary rail bombardments, heavy graviton shears, and beam arrays exceeding 10 terajoules per second output. By simulation, One system cracker equals the combined power of 4 Aegis carriers plus all supporting auxiliaries. In direct engagement, humans cannot win. That was the conclusion the tribunal wanted. That was the conclusion recorded. But humans, I would later learn, were never interested in direct engagements. Down on Earth, the mood was different. The broadcast of sentencing had been carried across civilian nets. People in scrapyard towns and orbital slums watched the verdict delivered by alien judges who barely hid their disdain. Families clustered around battered screens, hearing the word annihilation applied to their entire species. And in the middle of that storm, Captain Darren Holt gathered his officers in the dim-lit wardroom of the carrier UHN Resolute. He looked tired. Not in the way of a man who'd lost sleep. Tired in the way of a man who already knew half the men and women in front of him wouldn't live to see the end of the year. "All right," Holt said, voice flat, no ceremony. "You've all seen the specs. You've heard their analysis. They're not wrong. Our ships are smaller, slower, weaker. That's the truth." Murmurs rippled across the table. Some of the younger officers looked away, ashamed. Holt leaned forward, knuckles pressed against steel. "But here's the other truth. We don't have to fight on their terms. We don't have to line up ship for ship and die like idiots. We're not going to," a lieutenant snorted bitterly. "So what are we going to do? Throw rocks? Their system crackers could glass half the colonies before we got in range." Holt gave a grim smile. "We're not throwing rocks. We're throwing knives in the dark. Logistics, supply chains, choke points. We cut their arteries until they bleed out. They've got fleets? Fine. We'll never let them gather. We'll make them scatter into pieces chasing ghosts." The officers shifted. Not comforted, not yet, but listening. Holt slapped the data pad onto the table, pulling up schematics. "They call our torch raiders primitive. You know what I call them? Cheap, disposable. Perfect. You crash 10 through a slipstream node. You don't need them all to hit. Just one. One raider detonates. You collapse the junction. Their 9-kilometer super dreadnoughts suddenly don't matter if they can't get to the fight." He let that settle. "Look, I won't sugarcoat it. Half our crews won't come back. Maybe more. But that's war. You don't win by being pretty. You win by surviving ugly. That's who we are. That's humanity." Silence for a long moment. Then slowly a few heads nodded. Outside the wardroom in civilian districts across Luna and Mars, reality hit harder. Mothers watched their sons and daughters board troop carriers knowing they might never come back. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. A miner on Ganymede summed it up in words that circulated across the nets. "They say our ships are crude. Maybe, but crude doesn't break. Crude keeps running when the fancy stuff fails. You can call us a primitive. Just remember, primitive things have a habit of surviving." Those words spread like wildfire, printed on signs, scrawled on ship hulls, whispered in last embraces before launches. Back in the tribunal chamber, my fellow analysts laughed at the thought of ordeal. Their tone was academic, detached. "Statistical probability of human survival in ordeal?" one asked me. 0.03%, I answered. But I hesitated before finalizing my report, because the human captain had looked into the tribunal's eyes without flinching. Because their people, though afraid, did not weep the way broken species usually did. They spoke in coarse phrases, unpolished. They shrugged when faced with annihilation. They even joked. "Knives in the dark," Holt had called it. And though the numbers made survival impossible, something about that phrase stayed with me. Because knives in the dark don't show up on simulations. The tribunal demanded formality, and so the humans were summoned again, their chosen captain standing before the towering judges of the Concord. From the gallery I listened, penning more notes into the crystalline archives. Their ordeal was now sanctioned, their extinction scheduled to proceed by honorable combat. What remained was ceremony, a statement of acceptance, a last chance for them to plead. Captain Darren Holt did not plead. He stood at ease in that uniform of plain-cut fabric, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight with the look of someone who had no more patience for posturing. When the judge matriarch Hissir asked him whether humanity understood the sentence, he simply nodded. "We understand," Holt said. His voice echoed through the chamber with no translator lag. The tribunal had installed one for his species, but he refused it, speaking their tongue in rough but steady cadence. You intend to exterminate us. That's clear. You've dressed it up in law and ritual, but the outcome is the same. Wipe us out. Gasps rippled through the chamber. No one spoke to the court like this. Not in 10,000 years. But here's the thing, Holt continued. We don't take sentences lying down. We choose our own punishment, and we choose exile. Not exile into silence, not into chains. Exile on our terms. You're going to regret giving us the choice. A hush, then open laughter. The Threx envoy's frills snapped wide. Your terms? You are gnats beneath a war engine. What terms can you set, primate? Holt gave a humorless chuckle. Simple. You want ordeal? Fine. Then ordeal's going to be loud. We'll raid your depots. We'll cut your supply lines. We'll take your corruption and blast it across every screen in your empire. Every move you make to kill us, we'll use it to expose you. We'll weaponize your trial until you wish you just left us alone. The laughter grew. Empty words, hissed one of the scaled judges. Your fleets cannot reach our depots. Your signals cannot breach our comnet. Your species cannot endure. Holt leaned into the mic. You'll find out. Back on Resolute, the atmosphere was different. The crew had gathered in the mess bay, screens replaying the tribunal declaration on loop. A young ensign muttered, he just told the entire galaxy we're gonna, what, live stream the Concorde's dirty laundry while we blow up their gas stations? Holt walked in, caught the end of it, and smirked. Pretty much. The room chuckled nervously. Holt raised a hand. Listen up. They think ordeal means meeting them head on, matching fleet for fleet, tonnage for tonnage. That's suicide. We're not playing that game. We're choosing our sentence. That means we make them choke on it. He tapped the table, pulling up schematics. Every one of their system crackers runs on a supply chain thicker than a Martian pipeline. Depots, junction hubs, fuel convoys. They don't move without them. You cut the arteries, the beast bleeds out. Sir, one lieutenant asked, they've got escorts. Entire wings guarding those convoys. Holt shrugged. So what? You think they can guard all of them? They've got 10,000 supply lines. We only need to hit a dozen in the right spots, and suddenly their 9-kilometer death bricks are parked, hungry, and useless. That's where our raiders come in. Someone groaned. Those coffins? Half of them don't even survive transit. Yeah, Holt said, voice heavy. And half of you won't come home. That's the price. But it's the only way we survive. We turn ordeal into a war of attrition, not of numbers. We make it cost them. Every depot we hit, every convoy we torch, that's us writing our sentence in their blood. The silence that followed was thick. No one cheered. No one grinned. They all knew what it meant. Finally, an older chief engineer spoke, voice gravelly. Well, Captain, if the galaxy wants a show, let's give 'em one hell of a broadcast. In the tribunal's War Council chamber, alien admirals scoffed as reports circulated of Holt's words. Exile on their terms, sneered Fleetmaster Drix. Absurd. Their torch raiders will destroy more of their own than ours. Their carriers will crumble under a single beam strike. Let them thrash. It will amuse the sectors. Another leaned back in his carapace chair, chittering with amusement. We'll send them token depots to strike. Let them waste their fuel in futile gestures. The ordeal will end the same, with their extinction documented for the archives. I noted their confidence, but in my margins I wrote a single line. They underestimate human willingness to bleed for survival. On Earth, families watch the broadcasts. Not propaganda, raw feeds. Mothers clutch children as they listen to Holt tell the tribunal humanity would choose its own punishment. Men in factory towns shook their heads and muttered, Mad bastard. One teenager posted to the nets. They think we're weak. They don't know our dads come home from 12-hour shifts and still fix the car. We don't break. Another scribbled the words, choose our sentence on a protest sign. It spread, painted on walls, stenciled on helmets, etched into the plating of outbound warships. That night, Holt recorded a message to all colonies, transmitted on every civilian band. You've all seen the trial. You've heard their sentence. Annihilation or ordeal? Well, we choose ordeal, but not their ordeal. Ours. We choose exile. Exile where we fight back, where we survive ugly, where we live on our own terms. That means sacrifice. That means pain. But it also means freedom. The conquered wants us wiped out because we won't play by their rules. So here's the truth. We'll never play by their rules. That's what makes us human. He ended transmission without flourish, just stared into the camera, eyes ringed with fatigue, and shut it off. In the tribunal archives, my peers logged the moment as yet another example of human bravado. A dying species, one wrote. A final tantrum, another mocked. But I felt the unease again, because species about to die usually begged. They usually cried or pleaded for mercy. These humans didn't. They looked the galaxy in the eye and said, "We'll choose our punishment, and you'll regret letting us?" I thought of their crude carriers, their suicidal raiders, their stubborn captain, and for the first time, I wondered if ordeal would amuse us or scar us. The ordeal began not with thunderous fleet clashes, but with a whisper in the dark. From my position in the Concord analysis chamber, I monitored the initial engagements. Our intelligence predicted that humans would attempt desperate skirmishes. The system crackers had not yet left dock, so we dispatched a screening flotilla, 6 Concord heavy cruisers, shielded and beam-armed, to patrol the Luria slipstream gate. It was a routine assignment. The gate was one of the larger junctions, stabilizing passage between 4 trade-rich sectors. Even if humans struck here, it was symbolic at best. No primitive fleet could damage the structure itself, or so we thought. The first human contact was laughable. Dozens of small blips exited the slipstream corridor, scattered across the periphery like a handful of rocks thrown into a pond. Their profiles matched what we'd cataloged as torch raiders. Disposable hulls with crude torch drives and volatile antimatter charges. "Targets locked," the Concord flotilla commander reported over the comm. His tone was dismissive. "We will swat them before they cross half the distance." He was not wrong at first. Beam fire lanced through the dark. Half the raiders went up in incandescent blossoms, antimatter containment failing and snuffing their fragile frames. It was a display of superiority so total that the observation chamber erupted in laughter. "Primitive coffins," one of my peers muttered. "Barely a threat." Then 3 of them got through. On the human side, the experience was different. Inside Raider 17, a cramped coffin of steel and rattling pipes, Ensign Mikkel Harlow kept one hand on the control stick and the other wrapped around a photograph taped to the panel. His wife and son back on Mars. "Jesus, they're cutting us to pieces," his wingmate crackled over comms, voice high with static. "Keep the drive hot," Harlow muttered. Sweat dripped down his nose. "Don't think. Just keep it hot." A beam sliced past, vaporizing Raider 22 into plasma. Harlow gritted his teeth, shoved the stick forward, and punched through the debris cloud. His instruments screamed warnings. Hull breaches, radiation leaks, containment unstable. None of it mattered. He was 30 seconds from target. 17, pull up. You're going too fast." "Not fast enough," Harlow whispered. He never heard the rest. The Raider slammed into the slipstream node's stabilizer ring and detonated. The antimatter charge tore through the anchoring lattice like an axe through bone. The other 2 survivors followed, plunging into separate nodes, detonations rippling across the junction. And then the impossible happened. From my station, the sensors flared red. The Luria slipstream gate, a structure that had endured meteor impacts, sabotage attempts, even limited warfire, buckled. The anchoring rings shuddered, synchronization faltered, and then the entire corridor collapsed in a catastrophic implosion of folded space. The Concord flotilla reeled. Several cruisers were ripped apart instantly, caught in the collapsing tide. The rest scrambled away, their commanders stunned. The gate, the artery of 4 sectors, was gone. For a long, frozen moment, no one in the tribunal chamber spoke. I broke the silence, my mandibles trembling against the mesh. "They collapsed the node." "Impossible," someone hissed. "Not impossible. I corrected. Unthinkable. On Resolute, Holt stood in the CIC, jaw clenched, watching the feed. The gate collapse was visible even from their distant position, a distortion ripple that twisted stars into streaks before fading into a void where the corridor once pulsed. A young comms officer whispered, "They did it. They actually did it." Holt didn't smile. "How many made it back?" Silence. Then the answer. "Half, sir. Maybe less. Raider wings are gone." Holt exhaled slowly, eyes closing for a moment. "Write their names, every last one. Put them on the wall. Nobody forgets who bled for this." Back in the tribunal, the mockery began to falter. "Unacceptable," snapped one of the judges. "They cannot be permitted to strike strategic nodes. Send reinforcements. Double the patrols." "But their strategy is suicidal," another countered. "They lost half. They're forced to destroy one gate. Unsustainable. They will exhaust themselves before we expend a tenth of our strength." I noted this for the record, but unease gnawed at me. The gate collapse had stranded 3 Concord trade convoys mid-route. Civilian traffic screamed for rescue. Markets flickered, prices spiked. All from a handful of disposable human coffins. It was, strategically, insignificant in terms of firepower, but the psychological impact was disproportionate. Meanwhile, Holt addressed his crew in the mess. He didn't dress it up. "We lost half the Raider crews. That's the truth. We'll lose more. That's what this fight is going to look like. Bloody, unfair, ugly." One of the younger pilots slammed his fist against the table. "It's suicide, Captain. You can't keep throwing us into death traps." Holt's voice hardened. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't watch those names scroll across the board every night? Listen to me. Every Raider that goes in and doesn't come back, that's another crack in their armor. Another reminder to the galaxy that we don't lie down. You want clean victory? You're in the wrong species." The room fell quiet. Some lowered their heads, others stared defiantly. No one walked out. Holt softened, just a fraction. "You want to honor the dead? Make sure their sacrifice means something. We bleed now, so our kids don't get erased tomorrow. That's the deal. That's the only deal we've got." The alien analysts didn't understand. They saw only the numbers. 1 gate destroyed, half a fleet wasted. A net loss. But what they couldn't quantify, what no simulation could predict, was the effect on morale. Humans didn't break under the cost. They dug in harder. And for the first time in centuries, the Concord's analysts reported something not in the standard lexicon of fleet projections. Humanity fights ugly. They do not measure efficiency in tonnage. They measure survival in defiance. Torch Raider doctrine is not militarily optimal, but it is psychologically corrosive. Their losses do not deter them. They seem to embrace them. I stared at that line long after I wrote it, my claws tapping the console, because if that were true, ordeal would not be a performance. It would be a nightmare, one in which the Concord bled dignity while the humans bled bodies, and somehow both losses were not equal. The collapse of the Larea Gate should have been a minor inconvenience. That was the official position of the tribunal, a nuisance, nothing more. But the aftershock spread faster than the physics. 3 sectors reported shortages within days. Merchant guilds screamed that convoys were stranded in deep corridors. Colonial governors demanded reparations. And while our reports stated the humans had lost more than half their Raider wings in the attempt, the chatter across Concord civilian nets told a different story. The primitives had struck a giant, and the giant bled. I listened as the admirals debated their next step. "We must hunt them," Fleet Master Drix declared. "Chase down these vermin before they collapse another junction. If we spread screening flotillas across the major nodes, they will have nowhere to strike." Another scoffed. "We dilute our strength for insects? Ridiculous. Let the ordeal run its course. Their numbers will burn out." Drix slammed a claw against the table. "They already humiliated us once. If they hit another gate, we will look like fools. The court demands blood, not patience." And so the Concord fractured its fleets. Cruisers and escorts that once massed in cohesive strength now spread across dozens of slipstream nodes. Thinly stretched, each flotilla convinced it could swat down raiders before damage was done. It was a decision that would haunt us. On Resolute, Holt leaned over the tactical display. The glowing web of Concord logistics spun like a spider's net. He tapped 3 junctions with the edge of a stylus. Right here, he said, Atria Depot. They keep antimatter reserves in hardened tanks. You pop that, half a sector goes dark. Here, Venris Hub. All their food convoys pass through this slipstream. And this one, Lorna 5. Fuel distribution. His officers leaned in, faces grim. One of them muttered, "Sir, you make it sound like hitting grocery stores." Holt didn't blink. That's exactly what it is. You don't strangle an empire by shooting its soldiers. You cut off its dinner plate. You make its fleet starve. There was silence. Then Lieutenant Harrow cleared his throat. With respect, Captain, you're talking about starving civilians. Kids. Families. That's not war. That's... Holt cut him off. That's survival. Don't get it twisted. The Concord doesn't care about your kids. They already ordered annihilation. They're going to burn every colony we've got. You think they'll spare a child because we spared a freighter? You want to play honorable? We'll be extinct by next month. The room shifted uneasily. Holt's voice had that edge again. The edge of a man who'd already decided to carry the weight so no one else had to. Listen, he said softer. I'm not saying this is clean. I'm saying it's necessary. You don't have to like me for it. You just have to follow the plan. From the alien perspective, the next weeks were chaos. Reports flooded in, convoys ambushed, depots sabotaged, entire supply chains ruptured. Humans struck not with fleets, but with gnats. Handfuls of raiders, a carrier wing slipping through shadow routes, a detachment emerging where no patrol expected them. Our simulations scream contradiction. With their numbers, they should not have been able to sustain simultaneous strikes. Yet they did, because someone among them knew our layouts. Later, we confirmed it. Holt, the defector, had studied our logistics during Earth's petition years. He remembered every depot, every junction, every choke point. What for us was common knowledge, too vast to guard all at once, became a weapon in human hands. Concord's superiority in firepower is absolute, one analyst wrote, but logistical fragility is showing. We are spread thin. Response time has doubled. Civilian unrest grows. Still, the admirals mocked. Gnats biting at a Titan's ankles. Irritation, not injury. But the irritation festered. On Resolute, the mood darkened. Holt stood at the memorial wall again, new names scrolling across it. Raider pilots, engineers killed when a depot detonated prematurely, civilians caught in retaliatory bombardments. Lieutenant Harrow cornered him after a briefing, voice low but sharp. "Sir, how many more names? How many more are you willing to put up there before you call this what it is?" Holt looked him dead in the eye. "Everyone we need. That's the math." "That's not math, that's murder," Harrow shot back. The room froze. Nobody talked to Holt like that. Holt didn't raise his voice. "You want to walk off this ship, you can. I won't stop you, but if you stay, you follow orders. Because the only thing worse than me making these calls is you hesitating when lives are on the line. You think I like sending kids into coffins? You think I sleep at night? I don't. But you don't get to cry over the cost when the bill is extinction." Harrow's jaw clenched. He didn't salute. He just nodded once and walked out. Holt stared after him, shoulders heavy. He whispered to himself, not to the crew. "I'll carry it." "You don't have to." From my desk in the tribunal, I filed another report. Humanity's tactics are primitive, yet they exploit gaps we never considered exploitable. Their doctrine is asymmetric to the point of madness. They sacrifice half their force to achieve partial objectives, yet the psychological impact magnifies the result tenfold. Civilian markets reel, member races grumble, confidence erodes. I added one final line I knew my peers would mock. We mistake their ruthlessness for desperation. It may instead be strategy. On Earth, families watched the names scroll too. Screens in shelters and factories carried Holt's addresses. Some cursed him, swearing he was condemning their sons and daughters. Others wept but whispered thanks, because for the first time in history, someone was making the galaxy afraid of them. In one Mars dome, a father told his daughter, "You know why we keep fighting? Because Holt's making sure the Concorde remembers our names. Every one of them. That's how we live. And in the tribunal chamber, the laughter that once echoed freely began to fade. It wasn't gone, not yet, but it had soured, hollow at the edges. The gnats had become harder to swat than anyone had predicted. And though our fleets were still vast, still superior, I began to wonder how much blood a Titan could lose before the ankles gave way. Retaliation was inevitable. The tribunal demanded spectacle, and spectacle was delivered at Calvin's Reach, a frontier colony on the rim of Sol Authority. Calvin was no fortress. It was a mining world, red soil cut with scarred valleys, its atmosphere barely breathable without filters. 40,000 civilians lived in prefabricated domes, extracting ore to keep Earth supplied. The Concorde sent a detachment to make an example. From the tribunal's broadcast chamber, I logged the details as they arrived. Engagement force, 3 Concorde battlecruisers, escorting destroyer screen. Armament, graviton shears, beam arrays, planetary bombardment cannons. Objective, neutralization of Calvin's Reach. Secondary objective, lure human fleet into direct confrontation. The admirals were confident. With human raids disrupting depots, the public demanded blood. A burning colony would satisfy both vengeance and demonstration. And so the flotilla descended. On resolute, alarm screamed. "Calvin's under fire," the comms officer barked, pulling down distorted feeds. "They've already taken out half the domes." Images flickered across the CIC. Civilians running through crimson dust as beams slashed down from orbit. Whole shelters vaporized in white fire. Children clutched at mothers as oxygen alarms wailed. Holt stood rigid, jaw locked. "All ships, plot course to Calvin. Now." A junior officer hesitated. "Sir, 3 battlecruisers." "I said now," Holt snapped. The fleet jumped. They arrived to hell. From the viewport, Calvin's surface glowed with firestorms. Orbital platforms crumbled like toys under graviton shear. Concorde beams lanced downward in unhurried rhythm, methodical, merciless. "Targets locked," weapons reported. "Hold," Holt said. The officer stared at him. "They're expecting us to charge straight in," Holt continued. "That's what they want. We'll give them something else. Raiders 1 through 6, cut across their flank. Carriers, maintain distance until I give the word." The fleet acknowledged, though unease thickened the air. From my analyst's desk, I narrated the confrontation. "Human fleet has arrived. 6 carriers, approximately 50 raiders. They are badly outgunned. Direct engagement ratio, 3 Concorde battlecruisers equal to the entire human force. Probability of human survival, less than 2%. The tribunal gallery leaned forward, hungry for annihilation. The fight began. Raiders screamed forward in the staggered formations. Torch drives burning white. Concorde destroyers cut into them immediately, beams slicing, hulls rupturing. Explosions dotted the void, but 3 raiders broke through, plunging into the shadow of the lead battlecruiser. Their drives flared, and then they detonated, antimatter blasts chewing through the warship's shielding in jagged bursts. Gasps filled the tribunal chamber. The Concorde Crusade, 900 meters long, listed under the impact, secondary reactors flaring out. Not destroyed, but crippled. Holt slammed his fist into the console. "That's it. All batteries, concentrate on the wounded bastard. Give him hell." The human carriers opened up, plasma torch broadsides blazing in furious arcs. The range was suicidal. 20 kilometers, practically ramming distance. But it was the only way their crude weapons could penetrate. Bolts of white-blue fire hammered the crippled cruiser until its hull ruptured and spilled atmosphere into the void. 1 Concorde battlecruiser destroyed, at the cost of 20 raiders. From my vantage, disbelief reigned. Impossible. Casualty ratio suggests humans traded 20 expendable craft for a battlecruiser valued at 200,000 lives and 20 billion credits of armament. This imbalance was not in simulations. The judges hissed. "Luck, nothing more. Crush them." But down on the surface of Calvin, there was no victory. The 2nd Concorde cruiser continued its bombardment. vaporizing dome after dome. Civilians screamed across comm frequencies, begging for evacuation that would never come in time. Firestorms swept valleys. Holt heard every transmission. His face hardened with each. "Sir, we can't hold," his XO muttered. "We've lost 2 carriers already. Another strike like that, and the fleet is gone." Holt didn't answer. He stared at the feed from the surface. A little girl clutching her mother's hand, both running through the ash as a dome collapsed behind them. The transmission cut to static. "Pull us back," Holt finally said, voice low, broken. "Get what's left of our people out." The humans retreated, battered and bleeding. Of 40,000 colonists, fewer than 5,000 survived. The rest burned, vaporized under Concord fire. But the Concorde had paid for it. 1 battlecruiser lost, another limping. A kill ratio no one in the tribunal had expected. I logged the aftermath. Result: Concorde tactical victory, human strategic gain. Calvin's Reach destroyed. Estimated 35,000 civilian dead. Human fleet crippled. 3 carriers destroyed. 20 raiders lost. But Concorde losses: 1 battlecruiser destroyed, another disabled. This represents a 3-to-1 exchange rate favorable to humans, unprecedented for a primitive species. Casualty ratio has shocked tribunal audiences. I hesitated before submitting my final note. Human tactics are suicidal, but effective. Their willingness to suffer disproportionate civilian losses may be a strength rather than a weakness. On Resolute, the survivors gathered in the mess, faces hollow. Lieutenant Harrow slammed his tray down. "We can't keep doing this. We can't just throw lives into the fire and call it strategy." Holt didn't shout. He sat across from Harrow, staring at the table. "You think I don't see the bodies? You think I don't hear the kids screaming when the domes collapse? Don't you dare tell me I don't know the cost." "Then why?" Harrow demanded. "Why keep pushing?" Holt finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, haunted. "Because if we stop, that little girl I just saw burn on Calvin, she dies for nothing. Because if we stop, the Concorde wins, and every name on that wall gets erased like they never existed. We don't get clean victories, Lieutenant. We get bloody ones, and every drop has to count." The room went silent. No one challenged him again. In the tribunal gallery, the laughter had faded. The judges still sneered, still declared superiority. But there was an edge now: irritation, fear buried under arrogance. Because ordeal was supposed to be theater. Instead, it was turning into a war. And the humans, bloodied and burning, were still on their feet. The tribunal had grown restless. The destruction at Calvin's Reach had not gone as scripted. The humans had bled, yes, but so had we. And the spectacle of a battle cruiser gutted by primitive coffins was not the demonstration of superiority the Concorde had promised its citizens. So the judges demanded escalation, and escalation meant bringing in the judgment fleets. I was tasked with compiling the official dossier for the record. I remember the hush in the chamber as the projection lit the air, the outline of the most devastating war engines ever constructed. Judgment Class System Cracker. Length 9.3 kilometers. Mass 32 billion tons. Hull, triple-layer neutron carbide plating. Maximum density 12 meters at critical sections. Power, 6 singularity reactors, each capable of supplying continuous output equivalent to the fusion cores of 1,000 human carriers. Primary armament, 4 planetary rail bombardment spines, firing 200-ton slugs at 0.2 C, effective range 30,000 kilometers. Secondary armament, graviton shear projectors, beam arrays exceeding 10 terajoules per second, and atmosphere-penetrating plasma lances. Defensive systems, phase shield matrix, density sufficient to withstand repeated system cracker barrages. Carrier bay, 400 interceptors, drone wings with autonomous targeting. Crew, 200,000 personnel. By all simulations, a single system cracker could reduce a fortress world in 8 hours. Entire uprisings had been silenced by 1. Now 3 were being dispatched against humanity. The tribunal gallery erupted in smug murmurs. "Now ordeal ends," one judge hissed. 3 system crackers for 6 carriers? Their extinction is already written, another chuckled. I wrote my commentary for the record. Probability of human survival against judgment fleets, 0%. Statistical model indicates annihilation within 2 engagements. Concord losses, negligible. There was no doubt in their minds. For us, the ordeal was nearly over. On Resolute, the atmosphere was different. The specs had leaked because Holt made sure they leaked. He wanted his officers staring at the numbers, feeling the weight of what they were up against. The wardroom was dead quiet as the hologram of a system cracker rotated above the table. The damn thing was so massive they had to scale it down 4 times just to fit the display. Jesus Christ, one pilot muttered. That's not a ship. That's a floating continent. A younger officer whistled low. 4 rail spines. If even one of those gets through, not if, Holt interrupted, voice flat. When? They all looked at him. Holt leaned back in his chair, eyes tired but sharp. You try to meet that head on, you're dead. Doesn't matter how many raiders you've got. Doesn't matter how good you think you are. You line up against a system cracker, you lose. End of story. Then what the hell do we do? Someone snapped. Because running sure as hell ain't working either. Holt smirked grimly. Phase 2. Phase 2 had been on his mind since Calvin burned. Holt tapped the console, pulling up star maps. They want us to fight a brawl. We're not gonna brawl. We're gonna turn their own weight against them. He zoomed in on several sectors, lines of supply stretching like veins. Every one of those 9-kilometer bricks runs on supply chains thicker than my grandma's stew. Fuel, food, parts. You take out the nodes, you strangle the monster. The bigger they are, the harder they choke. One of the younger lieutenants frowned. Sir, even if we hit every depot on that map, it won't stop them. They've got redundancy for redundancy. Yeah, Holt admitted, which is why we're not just hitting depots, we're hitting legitimacy. That made the room blink. Holt leaned in, voice low. You've all seen what happened when we killed that battle cruiser. Their tribunal flinched. Their people flinched. Concord's whole empire runs on the lie that they're untouchable. We're going to tear that lie apart, piece by piece. Logistics on one side, truth on the other, and when the system crackers come knocking, they'll be too busy bleeding and explaining themselves to hit back clean. Silence followed. Then slowly one of the officers muttered, So, you're saying we fight a war of perception as much as a war of fleets? Damn right, Holt said. They want ordeal? Fine. We'll give them ordeal, but not the kind they expect. We make the whole galaxy watch while they bleed trying to kill us. And when it's over, doesn't matter if they glass every world we've got, they'll never walk away the same. In the tribunal, the judges laughed at human broadcasts. They saw the leaks Holt had orchestrated. Whispers of corruption, bribery, slave world contracts. They dismissed them as background noise, propaganda, the flailing of a dying species. But the murmurs across Concord member nets grew louder. Governors asked pointed questions. Civilian markets quivered. Noise, the admirals insisted. Nothing more. When the judgment fleets arrive, humanity will vanish, and so will their noise. I wanted to believe them, but I remembered Calvin. I remembered the crippled cruiser, the ratio that defied our simulations. And I wondered if Holt was right, if ordeal was no longer spectacle, but theater. A stage where humanity played not to survive, but to scar us forever. On Resolute, Holt gathered his crew one last time before the fleets arrived. He didn't shout. He didn't dress it up. He just stood there, hands on the table, voice steady. Listen, they're bringing the biggest guns they've got. 9 kilometers of you're screwed. We can't outgun that. We can't outbuild that. But we can outthink it. We cut their supply chains, we expose their dirty laundry, and we make the whole galaxy see them bleed. That's how we win. Not by killing their ships, by killing their story. He paused, scanning the faces around the table. Tired, pale, scared. I won't lie to you. Some of you won't come back. Hell, maybe most of you. But if we do this right, humanity doesn't die with us. Humanity lives. That's the deal. The room was quiet. Then an old chief engineer muttered, Well, Captain, you always did know how to sell a suicide mission. Laughter rippled through the wardroom, tired but real. Holt cracked a smile. Damn right I do. Now get to work. Phase 2 starts now. And so it began. The judgment fleets lit their drives, 9 kilometers of armored certainty surging toward human space. And somewhere out there, Holt sharpened his knives in the dark. The judgment fleets burned toward human space, each 9-kilometer monster a promise of extinction. But Holt already had his counterstroke in motion, a weapon planted years before when humanity still thought Concord membership was possible. During Earth's probationary petition, the Concord had permitted limited mining surveys in neutral sectors. It was a bone thrown to a primitive species eager to prove itself. Humans were allowed to dispatch probes, crude low-priority units the Concord barely noticed. But Holt had noticed something else. The probes carried not just spectrometers and drills, but Concord hardware, blink relay components, discarded after the Concord deemed them unstable prototypes. To the Concord, they were scrap. To Holt, they were opportunity. From the Tribunal archives, I later found the official report, Blink Relay Prototype, Model 22B. Function, Experimental Spatial Fold Repeater. Intended purpose, extend communication and fleet insertion across unstable slipstream corridors. Status, discontinued after high misalignment failure rates, yielding 63% catastrophic implosions. Considered unsafe. Designation, scrapped. We dismissed them. Humans did not. Back on Resolute, Holt explained it bluntly to his officers, projecting schematics across the wardroom. See this? Blink relay. They tossed it in the junk pile because it ate itself more often than not. But we don't need perfect. We just need enough to get through once. One officer frowned. Sir, those things misalign half the time. You're telling me we're going to bet fleets on unstable junk? Holt smirked, dry and humorless. We don't bet fleets. We bet raiders. Cheap hulls, small payloads. You lose 9 out of 10, but that 10th one gets through and suddenly you're sitting inside their living room with a demo charge. I'll take those odds. The room went quiet. Holt jabbed a finger at the schematic. The Concord throws away a tool, we sharpen it. That's doctrine now. Every fragment they discard, we turn back on them. They've got history, numbers, fleets. We've got nothing but scraps. Fine. Scraps will do. The tribunal analysts sneered when they caught wind of it. Blink relays? Impossible. One scoffed during our session. They lack the precision. Even our fleets cannot risk them safely. A primitive species weaponizing discarded prototypes? Laughable. Another tapped his claws on the table. And if they did, what would they accomplish? A few surprise insertions, flea bites. Nothing more. I wanted to agree, but I remembered Lurea Gate, remembered Calvin's Reach. Flea bites, yes, but flea bites that left scars. Holt stood before a battered camera in the CIC, face pale under harsh lights. Folks, I'm gonna level with you. The system crackers are coming. Biggest damn things the galaxy's ever built. Head on, we don't stand a chance. You already know that. But here's the play. Years back, when we were still dumb enough to think we'd get a seat at the Concord table, we planted something. Blink relays. Mining probes stuffed with their cast-off tech. Everyone thought it was junk. Everyone except us. Now those relays, they're unstable. They'll burn out half the time, collapse the rest. But the ones that work, the ones that hold steady for just a few seconds, they let us jump right into their backyard, inside their depots, inside their tribunal halls, inside their fleets. He leaned closer, eyes hard. They wanted ordeal. They wanted spectacle. Fine. We'll give them a show they'll never forget. We'll turn their scraps into blades and cut them open from the inside. That's our doctrine now. Turn every discarded fragment against its maker. And I swear to you, every man and woman who goes into the dark through those unstable relays, their names will never be forgotten. In the tribunal chamber, Holt's speech played across intercepted feeds. The judges laughed, long and cruel. Unstable technology, piloted by primitives, they will implode before they arrive. Human bravado, suicide disguised as strategy. Let them hurl themselves into the void. It saves us the trouble. But I wrote a private note in my log. Dismissal may be error. Holt understands risk calculus in ways we have not accounted for. Human doctrine increasingly defined by willingness to weaponize failure itself. In the Raider bays, crews prepared for the first test. Engineers patched together blink relay coils with spit and prayers. The drives hummed like angry wasps. One pilot taped a note to his panel. "If this kills me, tell my brother I won the bet." Another scrawled across her hull in white paint, "Scrap heap special." A mechanic muttered, "We're flying inside a black hole's stomach with a flashlight and duct tape. Anyone else realize that?" His buddy laughed, bitter. "Hell yeah, but it's the only game in town." That was how humans processed fear. Crude jokes, shaky laughter, and the grim acceptance that somebody wasn't coming home. Holt watched them board, arms folded. His XO approached quietly. "Sir, you sure about this? If those relays implode—" "They will," Holt cut in. "Half of them, maybe more. But the rest will punch through. And when they do, the Concorde won't see it coming. That's the point. You fight a giant, you don't aim for the chest. You go for the knee." He stared at the Raider hulls, faces of young pilots reflected in steel. "I'll carry the blame. They just carry the fight." We continued our analysis, smug. Relay weaponization success rate, negligible. Estimated survival probability for human insertion craft, less than 10%. Even if successful, operational impact, minor. The tribunal logged it without hesitation. But privately, I tapped one last note. Human willingness to gamble lives reframes cost-benefit calculus. If success is 10%, they will run the attempt 10 times until one works. Doctrine is not efficiency. Doctrine is persistence. We may not yet understand how to counter persistence. And so the stage was set. The judgment fleets advanced, 9 kilometers of arrogance, certain ordeal was nearly finished. And somewhere in the dark, Holt's Raiders lined up before unstable blink relays, engines whining, crews whispering last jokes to steady their hands. They were about to gamble everything on scraps Concorde had thrown away. And for the first time, I wondered if those scraps would cut deeper than any weapon we'd ever built. The blink relays had always been a joke to the Concorde. Scrap prototypes, half-broken toys, discarded after too many catastrophic implosions. But when Holt sent his Raiders through them, they didn't just pop out near depots or fuel convoys. Some of them punched through right into the guts of Concorde's own communication lattice. That was when ordeal changed forever. From my analyst's desk, I saw it happen first as noise in the channels. Garbled transmissions, unfiltered bursts of data where none should have existed. At first, I assumed it was interference, primitive systems thrashing in the void. But then the streams resolved into images, documents, tribunal, seals stamped in crimson, contracts, bribes, slave indenture decrees with Concorde judges' signatures. The kind of records buried so deep in sealed archives that even we, the analysts, weren't meant to glimpse them. And they weren't just appearing here in the tribunal chamber. They were spilling everywhere. Onto Concorde civilian nets, member world news feeds, even pirate relay boards. The humans weren't just striking depots anymore. They had hijacked the Concorde's own comnet and were broadcasting our corruption to the galaxy. On Resolute, Holt stood before his crew as the first wave went live. "All right," he said, voice dry but steady. "For those of you wondering why we risked our necks flying Raiders through blink relays that like to eat ships alive, this is why. We're not just blowing up their gas stations anymore. We're blowing up their reputation." He tapped the console, and tribunal documents scrolled across the display. Slave contracts signed in Hissier's own seal. Bribery accounts routed through governor families. Census numbers doctored to mask entire exterminations. One officer's jaw dropped. "Holy hell! They've been enslaving their own petition worlds." Another whispered, "We're not fighting soldiers anymore. We're fighting their lies." Holt nodded grimly. "Exactly. They want ordeal? Fine. Let the whole galaxy watch it. Every time they torch one of our colonies, we show everyone why. Every time they call us primitives, we show their hypocrisy. They've spent 10,000 years convincing everyone they're order incarnate. We'll show them they're nothing but thieves in fancy robes." He leaned closer, voice sharp. "Remember this. A dead fleet's a tragedy, but a dead story? That's an empire killer. In the tribunal chamber, chaos reigned. "Cut the feeds!" judges screamed. "Jam their transmissions!" But the problem wasn't jamming. The humans weren't sending the leaks from one place. They were bouncing them through every stolen relay, every hijacked depot terminal, every compromised civilian comm station. For every feed we shut down, 3 more flickered to life. "Impossible," one admiral spat. "Primitives cannot wage information war. They barely survived their own digital age," I corrected him quietly. "Perhaps surviving their digital age is exactly why they're dangerous. They understand the chaos of networks better than we do." He hissed at me but offered no rebuttal. Across Concord space, the fallout began. On Rithra Prime, citizens flooded plazas shouting, "We are not slaves," after seeing tribunal contracts that proved entire districts had been sold into bonded labor. On the core frontier, governors demanded the High Court explain why billions of credits in stability bribes had disappeared into tribunal coffers while their world starved. On neutral pirate nets, even hardened mercenaries laughed openly. The Concord, pure and noble, more like parasites with robes. For the first time in living memory, the Concord's myth of invincibility cracked. Not from plasma torches, not from antimatter, but from documents dragged into the light by a species that was supposed to be dying. On Resolute, the crew gathered in the mess, watching feeds from across the galaxy. Civilians rioting. Concord governors screaming at tribunal representatives. Member worlds calling for audits. One Raider pilot chuckled bitterly. "We've been throwing ourselves into meat grinders to scratch their paint. Turns out all we needed was paperwork." His buddy grinned. "Guess the pen really is mightier than the plasma torch, huh?" Holt, standing at the back of the room, allowed himself the faintest smile. "Don't get too cocky. They'll come down harder for this, but now they're bleeding in ways they can't patch with armor. Keep pushing." In the tribunal logs, I recorded the official line. "Human broadcasts are false, enemy propaganda, nothing more." But even I knew it was a lie. The seals on those documents were real. The signatures were authentic. Holt hadn't fabricated anything. He'd simply stolen our skeletons and rattled them in front of the galaxy. For the first time, I feared the ordeal was no longer about annihilation. It was about legitimacy. And legitimacy was bleeding out faster than our fleets could fly. Back in the wardroom, Holt's XO confronted him quietly. "Sir, the leaks are working. They're tearing themselves apart. But how far do you plan to push this? Expose enough corruption, and we're not just fighting fleets, we're destabilizing whole sectors." Holt didn't flinch. "Good. The more they scramble to patch their reputation, the less time they've got to burn our colonies. You want survival? You take every advantage, even if it means the galaxy burns with them." The XO shook his head. "And when the galaxy hates us for showing them the truth?" Holt's eyes hardened. "Then at least they'll remember us. Hate we can survive. Erasure we can't." In the tribunal gallery, judges snarled as riots played on screens. "Deploy sensors, arrest dissenters, silence the colonies before this spreads further." But it was already too late. Once truth leaks, it cannot be resealed. I watched their fury, their desperate scrambling, and I realized Holt had outmaneuvered them without firing a shot. He had weaponized the one thing no empire can armor against, its own rot. And somewhere in the void, human raiders kept slipping through unstable blink relays, scattering more files, more proof, more ugly truths. Every jump cost lives. Some relays imploded, swallowing crews whole. But those who survived carried fire more devastating than any plasma torch. Humanity was carving its survival not with guns, but with shame. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Concord was afraid of words. Though leaks had torn through the Concord like plasma through paper, but leaks couldn't stop rail slugs. While governors raged and citizens rioted, the fleets kept hunting. And when they finally cornered the humans in open space, the result was brutal. From my analyst's vantage, the reports came in crisp and cold. Engagement at Belarus Drift. Concord forces, 2 battlecruisers, 6 destroyers, screening interceptors. Human force, 3 Aegis-class carriers, 20 torch raiders. Result, 2 human carriers destroyed, raiders annihilated, human fleet routed, survivors scattered. Engagement at Yessa Corridor, human ambush attempted, Concorde countered with drone wings, human loss rate 65%, Concorde losses negligible. Each report ended the same. Concorde victory, human retreat. The admirals preened. The ordeal nears completion, they boasted. The gnats are swatted. Their defiance burns itself out. The judges echoed it with smug certainty. Let them bleed. Their leaks matter not if their fleets are ash. And I, reading the casualty lists, thought, if only it were that simple. On Resolute, the mood was anything but smug. The carrier was limping, hull plating scorched black, half the hangars gutted, reactor output down 30%. The sick bay overflowed, medics working with hands slick in blood. Holt stood in the CIC, staring at the tactical map with a face carved from stone. How many carriers left? He asked quietly. 3, sir, his XO answered. Maybe. Resolute's reactors holding by spit and prayers. Vanguard lost her forward decks. Aurora is missing half her raiders. And the rest? Gone. The words hung heavy. Holt didn't move. Later in the mess, the crew gathered. Screens played the funeral stream, names scrolling across, photographs fading one by one. Raider pilots who never made it back. Engineers caught in reactor fires. Marines spaced when decks ruptured. A chaplain read the roll, voice hoarse, as families across the colonies tuned in. Lieutenant Eris Redden, Ensign Vale Torres, Specialist Jonna Lee, Sergeant David Cross. The names felt endless. Some crew bowed their heads. Some stared blankly. A few wept openly. And through it all, Holt stood at the back, silent, eyes fixed on the screen. When the stream ended, a young raider pilot slammed his fist into the table. We're dying out here for nothing, he shouted. Every time we try, they cut us apart. What's the damn point? Holt walked forward slowly, boots heavy on steel. The point, he said, voice low but sharp, is that every one of those names just bought us time. Time for Phase 2. Time for the leaks to spread. Time for the galaxy to see the Concorde for what it is. You think they died for nothing? Look at the riots on Rithra. Look at the governors screaming at the tribunal. That's not nothing. That's everything. The room was silent. The pilot sank back into his chair. Trembling, Holt's gaze swept across them. I won't lie. We're broken, but we're not done. Not until the tribunal itself bleeds. From the alien side, our analysts noted the shift. Human fleet strength is reduced by 60%. Carrier losses unsustainable. By all metrics, the ordeal should conclude within weeks. Yet even in their battered state, the humans didn't stop striking. Raiders still flared into convoys. Leaks still spilled onto nets. They refused to die cleanly. Broken wings, Admiral Drix sneered. Let them flap. We'll snap the bones soon enough. But I wondered if broken wings still carried blades in their feathers. Back on Resolute, Holt met with his senior staff in the battered wardroom. The hologram flickered, maps barely holding steady with failing projectors. This is it, Holt said. We've bled enough. We've lost enough. We can't keep trading ships like this. If we fight them where they're strong, we're finished. His XO frowned. Then what's left, sir? We're out of fleets, out of raiders, out of time. Holt leaned forward, eyes hard. The tribunal, that's what's left. We take the fight to the high seat, right into their sanctum. We broadcast every crime, every corpse, every rotten truth live to the galaxy, and we make them choke on it. Silence. The officers stared, stunned. One finally whispered, That's suicide. Holt gave a tired smile. So was Lurea. So was Calvin. So was every damn thing we've done since this ordeal started. And yet, we're still here. Broken, but here. You want survival? This is how we get it. Not by surviving pretty, by making sure when they kill us, they damn themselves with us. The crew didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just nodded, hollow-eyed, because they knew he was right. In the hangars, engineers welded with trembling hands. Mechanics painted names of the dead on the sides of scorched raiders. Pilots strapped into cockpits with photographs taped to panels. Nobody smiled, nobody joked, but nobody refused. They were broken wings. but wings still carried on the wind. In the tribunal gallery, the judges prepared for the final act. Deploy the system crackers, surround solution, end this charade. The admirals bowed confident. Yes, matriarch, humanity will be extinguished. Their ordeal concludes. The chamber buzzed with smug certainty. But in the back of my mind, I remembered the note I had written weeks earlier. Do not mistake their ruthlessness for desperation. It may instead be strategy. And I wondered, when Holt's broken wings finally dove, where would they land? On Resolute, Holt stood in his quarters, alone. He stared at the wall where thousands of names now glowed in soft light. The memorial stretched across the steel like a second skin, a roll call of sacrifice that grew longer every day. He whispered to the empty room, voice raw, I'll carry it. Every one of you, I swear, I'll make it count. He closed his eyes, hand pressed against the names. And in that moment, he stopped being just a captain. He became the vessel for all their defiance. Phase 2 had begun. The tribunal itself was next. The high seat system was the center of everything. The tribunal's fortress. The nexus of the Concord's authority. 10,000 years of law, fleets, and order radiated from its star like light from a sun. No primitive fleet had ever reached it. No rebellion had ever dared. And now, against all logic, the humans were coming. From my analyst's perch inside the tribunal chamber, I watched the feeds with clinical detachment. Defensive array, 12 orbital citadels, each massing 2 kilometers, armed with graviton shear projectors. Fleet disposition, 3 Judgment-class system crackers, 9 battle cruisers, 40 escort vessels. Interceptor wings, 4,000 strong. The data was unassailable. Any primitive fleet that approached would be vaporized before closing to range. The tribunal repeated its mantra with smug certainty. Ordeal concludes here. They cannot breach the high seat. I logged my commentary as procedure required. Probability of human penetration into high seat defenses, 0%. And yet, I remembered the collapse of Luria Gate. I remembered Calvin's Reach and the cruiser gutted by coffins. I remembered leaks spilling like blood across the galaxy. And I found my claws tapping, restless, as if my own body doubted the report I had written. On Resolute, the preparation was grim. The ship limped toward the relay network Holt had seeded years ago. Hull plating still blackened, reactors whining. Only 3 carriers remained, half their raiders held together by patches and prayers. In the hangar bays, Marines stood in rows, armor scuffed, rifles clutched. They weren't smiling. They weren't talking much. Just quiet, steady breathing as they checked each other's gear. A sergeant barked, "Check seals! Last thing you want is to pop through a blink relay and choke before you even see the enemy." One Marine chuckled weakly. "If we're lucky, the relay implodes, and we don't have to do this at all." Another smacked him on the helmet. "Shut up. If I'm dying today, I'm dying with boots on the tribunal floor." It wasn't bravado. It was resignation sharpened into steel. Holt stood above them on the catwalk, arms crossed, face grim. His XO joined him, voice low. "They know this is suicide." Holt nodded. "Yeah, and they're going anyway, because they know what's waiting if we don't." The XO hesitated. "Sir, even if the relays hold, even if we get Marines inside, the tribunal is a fortress. Best case scenario, half of them don't make it past the first corridor." Holt's voice was steady. "Half is enough. We don't need to take the whole fortress. We just need to show the galaxy, the tribunal on its knees. Live, raw, no spin, no lies. We do that, and every name on that wall lives forever." The tribunal gallery filled with laughter as human movement was detected. "Look, they limp toward the high seat with 3 battered carriers and scraps of raiders. Fools!" Another judge sneered. "This ordeal has gone on too long. Let it end. Annihilate them. Their scraps will make fine examples." The laughter echoed, smug and sure. But as the feed tracked the humans, something strange happened. Instead of charging the Concorde Armada head-on, the carriers shifted position, aligning with faint signals in the void. I frowned, claws tapping. "What are they?" And then the relays lit. To the Concorde, they were unstable junk. To Holt, they were blades. Blink relay nodes flared to life across the system's periphery, unstable corridors tearing open like jagged wounds in space. Human raiders plunged into them, drives screaming, hulls rattling. Half would never emerge, but the half that did materialized inside the system, behind escort lines, in the shadow of citadels, and in some cases, dangerously close to the tribunal fortress itself. Concord alarms blared. Admiral shouted, "How did they? This is impossible!" But it was happening. Primitives had just blinked past the impenetrable wall, turning unstable prototypes into daggers pointed at the heart of the Concord. In the hangars, Holt addressed the Marines over open comms. "This is it. You all know what you signed up for. You're not just soldiers today. You're the blade we put to their throat. The tribunal thinks ordeal ends here. Let's prove 'em right, but not the way they expect. Some of you won't come back. Hell, maybe most of you. But if you get through, if you so much as take a corridor and fire one shot with a camera rolling, the galaxy will see it. They'll see the tribunal bleed, and they'll know humanity never went quietly." A Marine shouted back, "Then let's go make some noise, sir." The hangar erupted in a ragged cheer, not joyful, defiant. The tribunal chamber froze as first reports came in. Human boarding pods detected inside the high seat perimeter. Impossible! The defenses, they bypassed the outer line entirely. Judges screeched, admirals roared, but nothing stopped the truth. Humans had done what no species had ever done. They had put boots on the tribunal's doorstep. On Resolute, Holt watched the feeds as pods disappeared into relays. His XO glanced at him. "Sir, even if this works, even if they breach the tribunal, we don't have the fleet left to pull them out." Holt didn't look away from the screens. "We're not pulling them out. This isn't about extraction. It's about impact. They go in, they show the galaxy what the tribunal looks like with guns in its halls. That's enough." His XO stared at him, then nodded slowly. "God damn," he whispered. "You're really going to pull it off, aren't you?" Holt finally allowed himself a thin smile. "We'll see." In the tribunal chamber, I wrote my note for the record, claws trembling. No primitive strike force has ever reached the high seat. Until now, humanity has achieved the impossible, not with power, but with audacity. The ordeal has shifted. This is no longer trial, it is humiliation. And somewhere in the dark, human Marines hurtled through unstable blink corridors, clutching rifles, whispering prayers and laughing bitter jokes. One said, "If this kills me, tell my mom I made history." Another muttered, "Screw history, I just want to punch a judge before I die." And then the light swallowed them whole. The high seat was about to learn what ordeal really meant. The blink relays tore open space like jagged wounds, and through them came the pods. Crude, ugly steel coffins, rattling with unstable energy, pushed forward by human stubbornness more than engineering, half disintegrated in the tunnels. A quarter more missed entirely, scattering into deep void, but enough made it through, and those pods slammed into the walls of the tribunal citadel itself. No primitive had ever touched this place. No enemy had ever set boots on its sacred marble corridors. And yet now alarms screamed across the sanctum of law as human Marines poured out of the breach. From my observation dais, I could barely process it. Human incursion confirmed. Breach on the eastern colonnade. Secondary breaches in sub-level archives. Estimated strength, 200 Marines. Judges shrieked in disbelief. Admirals cursed, demanding explanations. "It is impossible," one screamed. "No primitive could infiltrate the high seat." And yet the feeds told no lies. Cameras showed rough armored figures smashing through doors, rifles spitting jagged bursts of fire. Concord guards fell in sprays of blood. Statues toppled. The air itself seemed to shake. Inside the citadel, Sergeant Keller hit the marble floor rolling. "Move! Move!" he barked, his squad spilling out behind him. Rifles up, eyes scanning. A Concord guard rushed the corridor, plasma pike raised. Keller put 3 rounds in his chest and kicked him aside. Private Jensen swore. "Jesus, we're actually inside the tribunal." "Yeah," Keller muttered. Try not to get killed before you enjoy the view. They pushed forward, boots pounding ancient stone. The tribunal was supposed to be untouchable, a place of silk and ceremony. Now it was a war zone, and the silk was burning. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Ramos led a squad through the archive halls. "Clear!" a Marine shouted, blasting a guard. Ramos shoved a camera drone onto a pedestal, yanking the feed live. "Command, we're online. Galaxy's watching." The feed broadcast instantly. Tribunal judges cowering in their chambers, marble walls stained red, humans storming forward with rifles and grenades. Billions of civilians across Concord. Space saw it raw, unfiltered. The high seat itself under siege by a species that was supposed to be dust. On Resolute, Holt stood in the CIC, watching the streams go live. His crew held their breath as images of tribunal judges flashing across the galaxy appeared. One Marine shoved a judge to the floor, rifle pressed to his chest. The judge wailed, robes stained with blood. "Sir," the XO whispered, voice shaking. We're actually showing them the tribunal on its knees." Holt's jaw tightened. "Good. Now the galaxy sees the truth. Not just documents, not just leaks. They see fear in the eyes of the bastards who condemned us." From the alien side, disbelief turned to panic. Feed integrity compromised. Human broadcasts overriding tribunal networks. Estimated reach. System-wide, spreading to colonial relays. Civilian exposure. Uncontrollable. Judges screamed at technicians to cut the feeds, but every attempt failed. Humans weren't just fighting with rifles. They were fighting with visibility. Every helmet cam, every drone, every crude transmitter was turned outward, raw and unfiltered. And across conquered space, citizens who had worshipped the tribunal's invincibility watched as it bled. Back in the Citadel, the fighting was savage. A Marine squad pushed through a corridor, grenades blasting open doors. Concord guards fought hard, disciplined, but they weren't prepared for humans fighting like cornered animals. Private Chen ducked behind a column, plasma bolts shattering stone. He screamed into his mic, "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Sergeant Keller dragged him back, slamming a tourniquet on. "You're fine, kid. You're not dying on marble. You're dying in a bar back home when you're 80, got it?" Chen groaned, bleeding, but he nodded and kept firing. The squad laughed grimly. That was how humans fought. Humor in hell, jokes through the blood. Ramos's squad reached the tribunal floor itself. The great hall where judgment had been passed for 10,000 years was now a battlefield. Marines stormed in, guns up, shouting. Judges scattered, robes flaring as they scrambled behind pillars. "Get them on camera," Ramos barked. Drones zipped overhead, feeds flickering galaxy-wide. A Marine shouted, "Smile for the galaxy, you bastards!" Before firing into the ceiling, sparks raining down. The footage was electric. Billions watched as the tribunal, the sacred untouchable tribunal, cowered under human rifles. From my dais, I could not believe my eyes. This was not ordeal. This was not trial. This was desecration. I wrote, claws trembling. Sheer disbelief. Humanity has breached the sanctum of law. They broadcast our humiliation live. This has never occurred in Concord history. It is unthinkable, and yet it is happening. Back on Resolute, Holt's XO turned to him, pale. "Sir, what if they don't make it out? What if every Marine dies down there?" Holt's eyes were hard. "Then the tribunal has to explain to the galaxy why their sacred halls are covered in human blood. And that'll be worth more than any fleet we could ever build." In the tribunal hall itself, Sergeant Keller's squad pinned down a cluster of judges, dragging them into the center. Marines forced them onto their knees, rifles at their backs. One Marine shoved a camera drone forward. "World, meet your judges," he shouted, voice dripping with scorn. "Untouchable, immortal, wholly conquered, begging like cowards." The feed went viral instantly. Across conquered space, civilians gasped, governors shouted, fleets faltered. The tribunal had never looked so small. But the cost was staggering. Marines fell room by room, cut down by guards, torn apart by plasma. Pods went silent one after another. By the time the hall was secured, half the force was gone. Keller wiped blood from his visor, voice hoarse. "We're not leaving, are we?" Ramos shook his head, staring at the feed. "Doesn't matter. The whole galaxy saw. That's enough." They both laughed bitterly, rifles still up. From my analyst's log, the entry was clear. The ordeal is no longer about fleets. It is about perception. Humanity has turned our sanctum into theater, our tribunal into stage, and our humiliation into their victory. For the first time, I fear ordeal has backfired. The court condemned them, and in doing so, gave them the greatest stage in history. And somewhere in the burning halls of the tribunal, Marines still fought, still broadcast, still joked between gunfire. "Hey, Sarge," one said as he reloaded, blood streaking his armor. "You think this'll make the history books?" Keller barked a laugh. "History book? Kid, this is the history book." And the camera feed carried those words to the stars. The feeds from the tribunal halls hadn't even gone dark when the second hammer fell. Torch ships, the ugliest, most desperate craft humanity had ever built, lit their drives in half a dozen systems. They weren't warships in the Concorde sense. No sleek lines, no elegant reactors. They were little more than industrial husks. Their engines cranked past safety until the reactors howled like dying stars. And one by one, those ships flung themselves into the slipstream nodes. The nodes weren't meant to take that kind of punishment. A slipstream junction was like the artery of an empire. Delicate, tuned, irreplaceable. It kept fleets moving, economies flowing, legitimacy intact. When the first node imploded, the shock rippled like a scream across subspace. By the time the third one went, even the tribunal feeds were drowned out by alarms. In the tribunal war chamber, alien fleet masters scrambled. Primary junction between the core and outer reach is gone. Judgment Fleet Sigma is stranded. Immediate recall impossible. Node collapse confirmed in 4 sectors. Projection, 10 more in next cycle. The panic was raw. These weren't losses of ships. They were amputations of empire. Fleets scattered across the galaxy now hung in isolation, too far to respond, too cut off to reinforce. Who authorizes such barbarism?" one admiral gasped. I answered grimly, claws scratching notes. "Humans do. They burn their own torch ships, sacrifice crews by the hundreds, and they do it smiling. To them, pain is not deterrent, it is currency." On Resolute, Holt stood rigid as reports flowed in. Node at Calros Rift, gone. Torch ship Indomitable made contact. 0 survivors. Holt closed his eyes for just a second. He'd signed the orders. He knew what it meant. Another report came in, flat and brutal. Node at Vale Archipelago destroyed. Torch ship Banner lost with all hands. The CIC was silent except for the hum of machinery. Finally, Holt spoke, his voice iron. "Mark them," he ordered. "Every ship, every name. They'll be remembered." The crew nodded. They weren't shocked anymore. They were resolved. In the tribunal citadel, the consequences landed fast. Judges screamed at guards to restore order, but their words rang hollow under human rifles. Marines barked commands, cameras still rolling, feeds still spreading. One Marine shoved a trembling judge onto the tribunal dais. "Say it," he snarled. "Say humanity chooses its own sentence." The judge stammered. "This is illegal. This is blasphemy." The Marine pressed his rifle harder into the judge's ribs. "Say it." The camera drone zoomed in, broadcasting the sweat beating down the alien's forehead. Billions of citizens saw their judge, their godlike symbol of order, kneel to human steel. And finally, voice breaking, the judge whispered, "Humanity chooses exile by its own terms." The chamber erupted in shouts, both alien and human. But the feed was clear. The tribunal had acknowledged it. From my analyst's log, legitimacy has shattered. Fleets are stranded. Nodes collapse faster than replacements can be projected. And the tribunal, under gunpoint, has bent. The ordeal has turned. What began as a sentence of annihilation has become theater of humiliation. And all the galaxy watches. Across conquered space, reactions were immediate. Governors whispered rebellion. Colonies began cutting signals to tribunal relays. Merchants panicked, trade routes fractured. In a mining outpost on the fringe, civilians gathered around a public feed. They saw human Marines forcing their highest judge to admit defeat. And for the first time, whispers turned into shouts. Maybe the tribunal isn't divine. Maybe they're just cowards. The tribunal's invincibility had always been its armor. Humanity had cracked it wide open. Back in the tribunal hall, Ramos's Marines tightened their perimeter. Plasma fire still roared through the corridors. Casualties climbed, but the hostages mattered more. Keep them alive, Ramos ordered. Galaxy needs them breathing, begging. One Marine chuckled bitterly. Never thought I'd see the day where the mighty Concord begged for their lives on live feed. Another spat blood onto the marble. Hell, I'll take it. Worth dying for. The mood wasn't triumph. It was grim satisfaction. They knew they wouldn't walk out, but they also knew the tribunal would never recover from what the world had seen. On Resolute, Holt studied the latest reports. Concord fleets, trapped without nodes, were trying to claw their way back through fallback lanes. It would take months, maybe years. In the meantime, they were stranded, impotent. Sir, the XO said quietly, this might actually be working. Holt didn't smile. His face was stone. It's not working. It's costing us everything, but it's the only way. The crew nodded. Nobody argued. They all knew. Victory wasn't survival. Victory was showing the galaxy that humans couldn't be broken on command. Alien fleet masters shouted over one another in chaos. Recall impossible. Judgment Fleet Delta cut off. Supply routes severed. It was more than military disaster. It was legitimacy unraveling in real time. Without mobility, the Concord wasn't an empire. It was a collection of stranded tyrants, shouting across void they could no longer control. And in the tribunal hall, another judge broke. On live feed, voice cracking, he wailed, "Stop the ordeal! End the trial! We acknowledge the human sentence! Let them go!" Marines jeered, shoving him to the floor. One turned to the camera, ripping off his helmet, face bloody and furious. "You hear that, Galaxy? They condemned us, and now they beg us to stop. Humanity chose its sentence, and its exile on our own terms." Billions heard it, billions remembered it, and in that moment, the ordeal was already over. From my log, final for the cycle, collapse complete, sentence inverted. The tribunal that condemned humanity has been condemned itself, not with weapons of equal strength, but with humiliation, sacrifice, and spectacle. The fleets cannot recover. The legitimacy is gone. The humans have made their mark. Crude, bloody, unforgettable. In the smoking halls, Ramos crouched beside a wounded Marine, voice low. "We did it, son. Even if we don't leave here. We did it." The Marine coughed blood, grinning faintly. Then, hell of a last show, huh? And the camera caught it, beaming that grin across the stars. The image of humanity laughing through blood as the tribunal collapsed around them. The tribunal halls still stank of scorched marble and alien blood when Holt's words finally carried across every surviving channel. The feeds had gone silent on the hostage standoff. The last Marines pinned down in firelit corridors, their fates sealed. But the images, the judges kneeling, the tribunal forced to declare humanity's chosen sentence, those lingered. The galaxy was already replaying them in endless loops. And now Holt, sitting aboard the battered flagship Resolute, stared into a black camera lens, face carved by exhaustion. "This is Captain Holt," he began, voice low, gravelly. "Human Fleet Command is no more. Half our carriers are gone. Most of our raiders never returned. Millions of our people burned in the ordeal you forced on us." He let the silence hang. Around him, the bridge crew barely moved. Some wiped at eyes. Others kept heads bowed. They all knew every word was true. "But we are still here," Holt continued, jaw tightening. "You condemned us. We chose our own sentence, and we endured it." Alien analysts logged it coldly. Numbers stripped of blood. Human fleet strength reduced by 52%. Torch ship core annihilated. Raider wings reduced to 1/3 operational. Colonies lost, 6 confirmed burned, 2 uninhabitable. The Concord did not collapse at once. Judgment fleets still existed, though stranded. Member worlds still flew tribunal banners, though voices wavered. But order had fractured. Where once the tribunal's word was law, now doubt spread like a virus. On Kithar Prime, a governor locked down tribunal offices and announced neutrality. On the trade hub of Eryx, fleets mutinied outright, defecting before orders could even reach them. Merchants whispered, if the tribunal can be humiliated, it can be replaced. The cracks widened. On Resolute, the crew gathered as Holt's words kept flowing. He wasn't reading from notes. He wasn't speaking as a politician. He spoke as a soldier who had carried the weight of extinction and was still breathing. You want to know what victory looks like? Holt asked, eyes burning into the camera. It doesn't look like parades. It doesn't look like banners. It looks like battered hulls, empty bunks, names etched into steel because we don't want to forget who never came home. He paused, voice breaking just slightly. Victory is survival, and survival is enough. The crew stood straighter. Some clenched fists. Others whispered the words under their breath. Survival is enough. In alien war rooms, the mood was chaos. One fleet master growled, "They've gutted themselves. They can't sustain a campaign." Another snapped back, "Irrelevant. They've gutted us too. No fleet coordination, no trust in the tribunal." A third voice, weary, "The humans shouldn't have survived at all. That was the point. The ordeal was supposed to crush them. Instead, they've turned it into theater. We don't know how to answer theater." For Holt, the victory was bitter. He spent his nights walking the Resolute's corridors, pausing at the memorial walls where names had already been etched. Indomitable, Banner, Shard, dozens of torch ships, hundreds of raiders, thousands of sailors. He traced a finger over one name, Lieutenant Drew, barely 22, volunteer from the first wave of recruits. Holt had spoken to the kid only once. Now his name was a permanent scar on cold metal. "We won, Drew," Holt whispered, "but hell if it feels like it." The human fleet limped, barely functioning. Engines failed mid-transit. Plasma torch cannons overheated, some fused solid. Medical bays overflowed with radiation burns, shrapnel wounds, and starvation cases. And still, ships flew. Still, crews drilled. Still, orders went out. Because the ordeal wasn't about destroying Concord. It was about proving that humanity couldn't be erased by decree. And on that front, Holt knew they had succeeded. Across Concord space, the galaxy seethed. On the frontier, colonists openly cheered at the feeds of tribunal judges on their knees. On core worlds, riots flared, some demanding vengeance, others whispering that humanity had exposed the tribunal's corruption. Slave worlds saw the leaks, the contracts, the bribes, the falsified census records. They whispered rebellion. The tribunal still stood, but it no longer towered. It wobbled, cracks spidering out. The myth of its perfection shattered forever. Back aboard Resolute, Holt gathered his senior officers. The war table was scarred and half dead, holograms flickering. "We're not done bleeding," he told them, "but the galaxy saw. And that means we bought something no one thought possible. Time." His XO frowned. "Time to rebuild?" Holt shook his head. "Time to exist. That's all we ever needed." Later he returned to the camera, the galaxy still tuned in. "We are not conquerors," Holt said, voice steady. "We are not saviors. We are survivors. You condemned us to extinction, and we paid the price to prove you wrong." He leaned closer, as if speaking directly to every alien governor, soldier, and citizen watching. "So hear me clearly. Humanity doesn't need your mercy. We don't want your pity. We'll take exile, and we'll take it on our own terms. And if you come again to finish what you started," his eyes hardened, "you'd better pray you don't." And somewhere deep in conquered space, in the chambers of power, a shaken fleet master whispered what so many others now feared. They chose their sentence, and it was survival. We thought the ordeal would erase them. That was the point of it. A performance dressed up as justice. The tribunal condemned the humans with full confidence that their kind would break and that the galaxy would see the inevitable verdict. Weak species erased for daring to step beyond their station. It had been done before, countless times, But now, days after Holt's final words spread like fire through every relay, there is only silence in our halls. Not the silence of victory, but the silence of unease. Because the humans are not gone. They are diminished, yes. Half their fleets torn apart, colonies burned into ash, millions gone, and yet they remain. And, worse, they have become something we cannot calculate. I was there when the tribunal judges bowed at gunpoint, the most sacred chamber in our order reduced to rubble and smoke. I saw the feeds of human marines bleeding out in marble corridors while still pushing their broadcasts to the stars. I watched my colleagues try to laugh it off, to call it desperation, to dismiss it as savagery. But no one is laughing now, because in every council chamber, every fleet command, every trade hall, the same question hovers unspoken. If humans could do this at the very edge of extinction, what will they become if they are ever allowed to grow? Already, worlds defect. Governors weigh loyalties. Fleets mutiny not from human firepower, but from doubt. Doubt that our order is eternal. Doubt that our judgment has meaning. It was supposed to be a spectacle. Instead, it became revelation. And the revelation is this: humanity does not need to win battles to dominate the future. They only need to survive long enough to plant fear in every heart that watches them. I think of Holt's words, repeated endlessly across the networks. We are not conquerors. We are survivors. At first it sounded like weakness. Now it sounds like threat, because a conqueror can be resisted. A conqueror has limits. A survivor, a species that accepts annihilation as the price of endurance, has no limits at all. What do you do with an enemy who defines victory as simply being alive tomorrow? You cannot crush them. You cannot deter them. You cannot bargain with them. You can only dread them. The fleets we sent are stranded still, their slipstream nodes collapsed by human suicides. Our great weapons are parked useless in voids they cannot escape, and every captain who stares at those empty skies knows the truth. The tribunal no longer controls the map. The humans do. Not with fleets, not with firepower, but with perception, with the story of what they endured, and the knowledge that they did not vanish when they were supposed to. We used to mock their technology, their plasma torch cannons, their raiders, their crude carriers. We thought them barely worth the simulations, but no one mocks them anymore, because it was not their weapons that undid us. It was their refusal to play by the rules we set. Every discarded fragment we left behind, they turned against us. Every humiliation we tried to impose, they carried like armor. Every loss became fuel. And now every empire looks at its own outcasts, its own rebels, and wonders. Will they learn from the humans? Will they choose survival over obedience? We wanted a sentence. What we created was a myth. On mining stations at the edge of the void, children already chant the words, "Survival is enough." On prison moons, convicts whisper Holt's speech as if it were scripture. And in our own halls, behind closed doors, officials speak of the dread of tomorrow. Not openly, not yet, but the phrase spreads. Because tomorrow no longer belongs to the tribunal. Tomorrow belongs to those who proved we could not kill them. I close my eyes and see the tribunal chamber again. The marble shattered, the judges kneeling, the humans bloodied but unbroken, broadcasting the images to every world. That will not fade. That will last longer than our decrees, longer than our fleets, longer than our walls of law. Because humans have made themselves a scar on the galaxy, and scars are permanent. The court condemned them. They chose their sentence, and we will regret it for millennia. If this story gave you chills, smash that subscribe button for more epic HFY sagas, where humanity turns the tables on the galaxy's strongest empires. Now we want to hear from you. If humanity had to choose its own sentence the way Holt did, what punishment would you pick to throw back in the galaxy's face? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where survival isn't just victory, it's the weapon empires fear most. See you in the next story.